all time from behind you. The illusion has been just a dream. The valley of death and I'll find you.
Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinells, and this is kind of an intro to the episode because I don't think it's a secret that I've been recording these episodes somewhat out of order. Most of them are in order, a couple of them slightly out of order. And this is one of the episodes that was recorded out of order due to my guest availability. Now, the problem with that is sometimes I assume I will have gotten to things that, in fact, I have not gotten to. So, I want to fill you in on a couple things before we begin the episode proper. And the things that I want to fill you in on are what happened to those involved with the actual murders right after the actual murders. What did they do? Where did they go? So, I'm going to give you that information, and then we are going to begin, for real, the episode. So after the murders, Leslie Van Houten and Susan Sadie Atkins, they stayed on with the family. They didn't go anywhere. They stayed right where Charlie wanted them. Patricia Krenwinkel, however, went back home. And so did Linda Kasabian. And that was a tough choice for Linda Kasabian because that meant she had to leave her daughter behind. But she felt if she tried to get her daughter out, the family would know she was trying to leave, and then they would come after her. But she felt even if she left her daughter there, the family probably would not harm the child because Charlie didn't want to harm children. Yet, so he said. And as for Tex Watson, well, I'll let him tell you.
I was convinced he would have continued the murders until Helter Skelter started, and I just couldn't do it again. I told Manson I had called my mom in Texas and that the FBI had come to my parents' home accusing me of murder. As a result, that lie stopped the killing. And he sent us all to the desert. I was so relieved. As time passed in the desert, I became more and more confused. We couldn't find the bottomless pit spoken of in Revelation. We ran out of drugs, and the law seemed to be closing in on us. 2 park rangers had started asking questions, so Charlie ordered them killed. He felt they'd show up in an old rundown cabin the next day, so he left me there with a shotgun overnight to wait for him. I knew I wasn't going to kill them, so the next morning I took off in an old pickup and ran from Charlie. I drove the truck as far as it would go. I hitchhiked to the city, called my parents for money, and flew to Texas.
Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinells, and with me tonight, returning once again for the first time in a very, very long time, I think a year and a half, we have the one and only Mr. Tom Cole.
Hello, everybody. You know, we got all your calls, we got your emails, we even got some postcards, and we heard just the racket that was building up that you wanted some more Tom Cole in your life. So, Eric, I heard the call. I'm here to deliver. I'm here to give the people what they want.
You always do.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it.
That's what I'm here for.
All right. Well, Tom, I would love to spend more time talking about the old days and talking about your newborn and catching people up on your life and everything.
But we can't do that. We have so much to go over.
I was telling Tom, I picked up paper to start writing these notes, and I told Tom when he was coming over that we were going to work on the trial, and I actually had so many notes. What we ended up working on is just the arrest, really, and the lead up to the trial.
There's just so much to go over. I mean, there's just so much detail about this story out there, and it's every bit of it is really interesting in a different sort of way. That let's give each part its fair due.
Yeah, so we may or may not actually get to the trial tonight, but we're definitely going to talk about the lead up to the trial, the arrests of the Manson family. Now, Tom, just to fill you and anyone else who's decided to listen to this episode first, which you really shouldn't. You should go back and listen.
Listen to the whole series.
The whole series. But to recap, Charles Manson, con man, ex-con, 32 years old when he leaves prison,
Uh-huh.
moves out to California,
Yep.
accidentally almost starts this cult of youth in revolt, basically.
Yeah, why not?
The followers, he says they're not a cult, he says they're not brainwashed, but as you know from the episode we did on cults,
We definitely did.
he follows the cult leader rulebook to the T.
Yeah.
Get them separated from their family,
Uh-huh.
get them working hard, keep
Yep.
them busy. If they question authority, make sure they know that it's really them questioning themselves, not really authority.
Yep.
And if there's a problem, it's a problem with them, not the cult.
Yeah.
He does all those things right down the line.
And a strong indicator of a cult is saying we're not a cult.
Yeah. So he eventually, he meets Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, thinks he's going to become a record star, a rock star,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't go as well as he planned. Then he starts prophesizing the end of the world in a coming race war known as Helter Skelter.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
And he convinces, by some accounts, his family members to go out and commit murders in an effort to perhaps frame the Black Panthers for another murder that the family had committed,
All right.
and B, start this race war because he wanted the police to think that black people had done it, Black Panthers specifically,
Right.
and that this was all happening, and then him and his family would go live in a cave underground until they were ready to emerge and rule the world.
It's a seamless plan.
Yeah. What could possibly go wrong?
Right.
Now, it's debatable whether Charlie himself actually believed in the whole Helter Skelter deal,
Sure.
but that's what he told at least some of his followers.
Okay.
So, they do this, and that catches us up to where we are now. Some of the family has taken off. Some of the
Right.
killers involved in the actual murders have taken off. Others are still hanging around.
Okay.
And so we rejoin the family at Spawn Ranch in the days after the Tate and LaBianca killings.
Okay. You did a perfect job setting the scene.
Good. So, on August 16th, 1969, the police raid Spawn Ranch at dawn. Now, they had heard reports that family members carried weapons
Right.
and that they didn't all sleep together in the bunkhouses or in the main house. They slept in buildings all around the property and sometimes even camped out outside the property. So they worked on surrounding the entire ranch and coming in one fell swoop at dawn and arresting everyone they saw.
Right. Catch them by surprise, especially you don't know what you're walking into.
Right. And they did that, and they didn't meet too much resistance. No one, pulled a gun on him or anything like that. But Charles Manson did hide. He was found hiding under one of the buildings, and he had to be dragged out by police because the building was on like a false foundation.
Yeah.
It was like a movie set.
Right.
So now the family must be freaking out, especially Charles Manson,
Of course.
because this is August 16th. This is just a week after.
Yeah. The plan is not going to how they saw it going.
Right. And this is just a week after the murders.
Right.
So he's like, oh, fuck, like they're arresting us now for the murders. They know something.
Right.
Right. But guess what?
What?
They're actually not there about the murders.
Oh, snap.
They're actually there in response to reports of an auto theft ring being run out of Spawn Ranch.
Oh, okay.
Because in the build up to all this, Charles Manson had been stealing cars in order to convert them into dune buggies to better drive in the desert when
Right.
the family had to survive Helter Skelter.
Yeah, it's practical.
So they start rounding up the people and let them know that this is the reason why they're being arrested. In the commotion, police accidentally detained some of the ranch hands that worked at Spawn Ranch. They weren't family members. They
Right.
literally worked at Spawn Ranch. They were cowboys.
Right.
And Donald Shorty Shea is one of these ranch hands.
Sweet name.
Yeah. And he explains, hey, I'm not with the family. And, hey, Charlie, tell these people I am not with your family. I've got nothing to do with you
Right.
filthy hippie types.
But did he have some of the dirt on the family though?
Well, that's what Manson was thinking too.
Yeah.
So see, Tom, now
Ah.
you're thinking like Manson.
Haha.
So Manson calls out to Shorty and he says, hey, it's not nice to snitch, Shorty.
Oh. Ooh. Okay.
All the family members are taken to county jail, but they are released quickly after the DA declares that there is, well, it depends on which report you read. It's either because there was insufficient evidence to hold them,
Okay.
or more likely because there was a fuck up on the warrant and it was dated incorrectly, and so they had to let him go.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the official statement originally was that there was insufficient evidence, but really they were probably just trying to save a little face.
Yeah, they didn't want to look bad in front of everyone,
It had to do with the paperwork.
and
Yeah.
now they look bad in front of history. So
Right.
they got that going for them.
Well, they didn't look great anyway. For a long time, and even as we continue the story, we're going to see they refused to investigate the Tate and LaBianca murders
Yep,
together
right.
as one, case. On October 9th, Kitty Lutzinger is a relatively new member of the family,
Mm-hmm.
and she is 9 months pregnant with Bobby Beausoleil's baby. Bobby was actually under arrest for the murder of Gary Hinman, which is something we talked about
Okay.
in an earlier episode. So he's already in jail, but Kitty had been told by Charlie that Bobby was only arrested on minor robbery charges.
Okay.
But at this time, she discovers the truth that he is actually facing first-degree murder charges. Let me tell you about something that happened before this.
Oh, there's just so many levels to
Yeah. So after the family gets out, Charlie thinks it's a little too dangerous to stay at Spawn Ranch, so they move back to Barker Ranch,
Okay.
which was this isolated ranch out in Death Valley. Spawn Ranch was
Right.
kind of isolated.
Right.
Barker Ranch was
It's
like
way out there.
in the middle of the desert, and it was hard to get to even with four-wheel drive.
Perfect.
Everyone says it's very impassable. And in fact, they lived out there for a while, but it proved so difficult even for Charlie.
Yeah.
And he didn't really have the control over the followers that he hoped for because they always had to go to the city to get supplies. And the nearest city was Las Vegas.
Okay. Right.
So that's not, if you're trying to like brainwash people and make them stay with a cult, you don't want them running to Las Vegas every couple of days.
Right. Exactly.
After they're released from jail
Okay.
on these auto theft charges, he moves them out to Barker Ranch. It is there that Kitty Lutzinger, a fairly new family member, she is 5 months pregnant with Bobby Beausoleil's baby.
Right.
Now, Bobby Beausoleil had been arrested earlier for the murder of Gary Hinman, but Charlie didn't tell Kitty that that's what he'd been arrested for. In fact, he told Kitty that he'd been arrested on just some minor robbery charges.
Oh. Okay.
It was during this time that Kitty found out he'd actually been arrested on first-degree murder charges.
So she's freaking out at this point.
Right. So she's 5 months pregnant. She's stuck in this isolated ranch in Death Valley.
With so there's like no escape here.
Right. And suddenly, life in the Manson family didn't seem so wonderful to her.
Yeah.
And she, unlike others, didn't really believe that Charlie was, in fact, Jesus Christ. She watched his behavior become even more erratic than it had been in the past. He became even more violent as well. He didn't beat on her, but she watched as he beat the hell out of a new family member, a teenager named Stephanie Scrim. Kitty and Stephanie had talked privately about their shared disillusionment with Manson and the family, and October 9th, they saw an opportunity to escape the family and took it.
Oh, good.
Manson had gone back to L.A. in another attempt to raise some money for the family's move out to this Barker Ranch. While he was gone, his border patrol got a little sloppy, as you do when the boss is away. Kitty and Stephanie slipped out, but as night fell, they got confused in the dark and lost all sense of direction. Now, this was a problem because Charlie had always said that anybody who left the family would be killed.
Yes.
And the girls were very fearful that they would become the family's next targets. Now, it's true, Charlie was off in L.A., and he probably wouldn't hear about this for a little while, but with Charlie gone and Tex Watson out of the picture, that meant that Crazy Clem was in charge.
Oh, no.
And Clem legit
It was crazy.
Crazy.
He lived up to the name.
And the girls' fear further intensified when they realized that their attempted escape had been a complete failure. Confused in the dark, they had simply walked in a circle around the ranch.
Oh, God. So did they go back and play it off like they weren't trying to escape?
No, they actually hid outside
Oh.
and tried to find another time when they could escape.
Oh.
They must Yep.
So they got to watch while they're like, oh, these bitches have escaped. We're going to go kill them.
I guess so. I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe they
man.
didn't even realize that they had left exactly at that point yet, because what happens is they must have felt doomed, right? These girls are like, oh man, they're going to notice that, we were gone and we tried. But as fate would have it, the cavalry arrived just in time.
Okay.
Because the very next morning, 4 a.m. in the morning, as a matter of fact, October 10th,
Yeah.
the police raided Barker Ranch.
Woo.
On suspicion of theft and other charges. They first stumbled upon Clem, who'd been on guard duty, I say in quotations, and he was found with a shotgun next to him. They rounded up all the family members, including Leslie, Pat, Susan, Squeaky, and 2 children, including Susan Atkins' son, Zizo Z.
Zizo Z.
She said it sounded like a good name at the time. They also raided nearby Myers Ranch, where they picked up additional family members. Police spent the day gathering up evidence at Barker Ranch, including stolen property and a cache of stolen weapons, and as they were driving away, 2 teenage girls came running out of the bushes towards a cruiser. It was Kitty and Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
They admitted to being family members, but they swore they'd been attempting to flee the family when the police showed up. They said they feared for their lives, and they wanted police protection. And they were willing to talk.
Oh.
Now, to play devil's advocate, is it possible that the girls were never attempting to flee the family,
Definitely.
but they saw an opportunity when the police came, and for whatever reason they weren't with the rest of the family members?
See, that's where my brain goes. The police show up and they're like, "Oh crap, the game's up. We're in trouble now." It's like, all right, let's just throw these guys under the bus so it will help protect our prospects here.
Yeah.
But if you're the police officers, you're gonna be thinking like, really, am I supposed to believe you? I mean, you're in this loony bin with all these other people. You could just be trying to con me right now. Why should I believe you?
But, the police are willing to take a chance because it's just 2 girls out of a bunch that they picked up, and what the hell? We'll
Yeah.
give it a shot. See what they have to say.
And the words that "we'll talk" really that really carries some weight.
Yeah. So police, and after some digging around, they discover that L.A. County detectives had been trying to find Kitty because she was the girlfriend of Bobby Beausoleil, and they wanted to ask her some questions about Beausoleil and his possible involvement in the murder of Gary Hinman.
Right.
Kitty agreed to cooperate fully with police. Meanwhile, a handful of family members had successfully escaped the raids, and they called Charlie in L.A. to inform him of what had just gone down. Now, you might think that Charlie would cut and run at this point.
Yep.
He'd say, oh, the family's been rounded up. The police are clearly looking for me again. I'm just going to get out of here.
Right.
Instead, what he does is he gathers up his remaining loyal family members, and he heads back out to Barker Ranch. Now, why would he do this? That's the real question. He had to have known the police would still be keeping an eye on the place.
Of course.
And they were. So, when he goes into the ranch, the police see him, and they see the people he's brought in with him. On October 12th, deputies called for backup units and began their raid of Barker Ranch once again. They rounded up 7 family members who'd all been sitting peacefully around the kitchen table, but Manson himself was nowhere to be found. Police decided to search the house one more time before hauling off the family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was no electricity in the ranch.
Right.
Everything was done by candlelight.
Yeah.
So the police had to take a candle off the kitchen table and search the house by candlelight.
Oh, God.
So, an officer is searching the bathroom, and he's, poking all around with his candle, and he notices what looks like a small tuft of hair sticking out from a cabinet beneath the sink. Now, he's thinking to himself, well, that's too small a cabinet. There's no way there's somebody in there, but let me just lean down and take a close look. So as he starts to lean down, the door opens, and a little figure emerges. The officer barked, saying, "You make one move, and I'll blow your fucking head off." The figure replied simply by saying, "Hi."
Oh.
The officer asked his name, and the figure replied, Charlie Manson. He was placed in the truck bed with the rest of the family and an armed guard, and they were all driven off to jail. On the drive back, Manson explained that the police would be the first killed because black people especially hated police. The smart thing for the officer to do, Manson said, would be to set the family free and then run for his own life.
Uh-huh.
The police were unimpressed with this information.
Yeah.
They booked the family on theft and arson charges,
Okay.
and on his paperwork, due to his own statements and statements of the girls they'd arrested earlier, they booked Manson as Charles Manson, a.k.a. Jesus Christ.
Oh, God. Okay.
And that,
But they're still not connected to the murders yet.
they are not, but
Yeah.
those would end up being the final moments of freedom for Charles Manson
Yeah.
for his entire life.
Oh, my goodness.
On the same day all this happened, Kitty Lutzinger begins to talk to the police.
Right.
She told them it was her understanding that Bobby had been sent by Manson to get money from Gary Hinman, and that Manson had also sent two girls along with Bobby, Sadie and another girl whose name she couldn't remember, but it turned out to be Mary Bruner. We'll get to that later on. Kitty said that she couldn't remember who told her, but she had been told that a fight broke out between Bobby, the girls, and Gary Hinman, and that Hinman had ended up getting killed. She wasn't sure who had done the actual killing, but she did remember hearing Sadie brag about getting into a fight with a big guy who grabbed her hair, and then she had to stab him in the legs to make him let go.
Oh, okay.
Police realized that Sadie was in fact the alias of Susan Atkins,
Ah, uh-huh.
who they had just picked up along with the other family members
Okay.
at Barker Ranch.
Right.
They went to talk with her the next morning, and they informed her that they had a witness who had implicated her in the murder of Gary Hinman. Now, Atkins didn't know about Kitty Lutzinger and all that, so Atkins assumed that they were talking about Bobby Beausoleil,
Okay.
and that he was putting the blame on her for Hinman's
okay,
murder.
all right. Yeah, I see where this is going.
Susan assumed then that Bobby Beausoleil had turned on the family and that he was trying to blame the murders on her in an effort to get himself free and take off. He was never a full family member to begin with.
Right. Classic misunderstanding.
So she told police what actually happened at Hinman's house, and she was essentially truthful, although she did not mention Manson being there, and she instead blamed the murder squarely on Beausoleil.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we already talked about that in a previous episode, so I won't go into details on that here, but make sure you listen to the episode specifically about the murders and life on the ranch. Just listen to the previous episodes, is what I'm saying. She refused to repeat her statements on tape, but even so, her stories gave the detectives something to work with.
Absolutely.
On October 15th, most of the family members who had been rounded up in the ranch raids were let go because the prosecutors weren't able to pin the charges on any one particular family member. Yes, they suspected the family had done this, but they couldn't say, you did this.
Right.
So if you can't pin it on anyone, you have to say...
It would be unlawful to keep them there.
Right. Now, although they wouldn't admit as much publicly, investigators did see similarities between the Hinman, Tate, and LaBianca murders.
Yeah.
They all had victims that had been stabbed numerous times. They all had writing on the wall in blood,
Right.
similar writing about pigs and stuff like that, piggies. But they wouldn't admit this to the public. And in fact, there were some investigators who still believed there were no connections. Some investigators on the Tate case were certain that this had to do with drugs. Investigators on the LaBianca case were certain that it had to do with Lino's gambling.
Right.
And, so this was all just,
Right.
this wasn't connected. And investigators had nothing solid to tie the family to the Tate and LaBianca murders, but something bothered the detectives who had questioned Kitty Lutzinger. She had sworn that Susan Atkins had told her she stabbed a man in the legs when he pulled her hair.
Mm-hmm.
Hinman didn't have stab wounds on his legs. But didn't one of the Tate victims?
Oh.
They called the detectives working on the Tate homicide, and they noted the similarities between the murders
Right.
and said, hey, we have a woman here who says that she knows someone who stabbed someone in the legs. Wasn't one of your victims?
Didn't you have a stab wound on one of the legs over there?
And the police wrote it down, and they're like, okay, we're going to have to talk to this Susan Atkins person.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that because right now we've got other leads that we're following.
We're busy. We got things. It's on the list.
Yeah, their top priority, in fact, was a pair of glasses, prescription glasses that were found at the Tate crime scene. They said, hey, we find who belongs to these glasses.
Yeah, we found the murderer.
Right. And this is an interesting thing because none of the killers wore prescription glasses and none of them mentioned them in their statement. So it's a legit mystery as to where these glasses came from. As far as we know, they didn't belong to any of the victims. They didn't belong to any of the murderers.
Okay.
There are some who theorize that Manson himself went back.
Do you leave them there to kind of throw off the scent?
Yes.
Okay.
That's one of the theories.
Yeah.
Roman Polanski,
Oh.
Sharon Tate's husband,
Yeah.
became very nervous at this time because he knew about these glasses and he was glad that the police were, had a suspicion that they were following up on. Problem is, his friend and karate instructor, Bruce Lee, complained to him that he had lost his glasses recently. And for a moment, Roman Polanski was very afraid that Bruce Lee, for some reason, had killed his wife and his friends.
Yeah.
So he said, Bruce, that's terrible. You lost your glasses. How about we'll go down to the eyeglass place and I'll get your prescription and I'll pay for it and everything.
Oh, so he's running his own little side investigation here.
So Bruce Lee's like,
man.
oh, okay, if you want to, Roman. I mean, I know I'm a TV and movie star.
Yeah.
I got my own money, but all right.
Eric,
if
let
you
me
wanna.
just tell you, your Asian accent is spot on.
Yeah, this is exactly how Bruce Lee talks.
Yeah.
So yeah, he buys new glasses, and it turns out the prescription is not the same. And Roman would say later on that he feels terrible that he even suspected.
Well, I mean, when your family's murdered, you're probably not in like the right headspace.
Yeah.
You're probably
also
freaking out a little bit too.
It's not the worst thing Roman Polanski ever did.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't going to dive into that here, but yeah.
All right, so Squeaky and Sandy, two family members.
Yes.
They visit Charlie in prison. They're still allowed to visit him because they haven't committed crimes. They haven't been accused of committing crimes yet. And they are able to get messages to and from him and update him on the goings-on within the family. And they do this with the other prisoners as well. But they have a hard time finding Susan because unlike the other family members, now Susan wasn't let go because she was now implicated in this Bobby Beausoleil murder.
Yeah.
And this means that they're going to shift her from like jail to prison.
Yeah, there's a big difference.
And by her own account, Susan was scared shitless when she was moved to actual prison.
Yeah.
But she started doing something that she learned from Charlie.
Okay.
She started acting crazy. She would break out into spontaneous song and dance.
Okay.
And like wildly start dancing around so that the other inmates would be like, yeah.
Something's going on here, yeah.
Yeah. As George Carlin used to say, it's bad luck to hit a person like that. And they gave her the nickname Crazy Sadie.
Solid name. Clever
Yeah.
girls.
But her bunkmates were two former prostitutes named Ronnie Howard and Virginia Graham.
Okay.
Now, they just happened to be arrested at the same time, but these two women were actually friends IRL.
Oh, okay.
On the outside.
Yeah.
And they took pity on her, and they were like basically they were two of the few people who actually like were friendly to Crazy Sadie during this time. And Atkins was very grateful for their friendship. And the woman would talk late at night and sometimes while they were on work duty. And Ronnie and Virginia had very colorful stories to tell about life on the streets and, being prostitutes and all that kind of stuff. And Susan...
Oh, then she got talking.
Uh-huh.
So she wanted to swap some tales.
Uh-huh.
Oh, no. You never do. It's like rule 1 in jail. You don't talk about your crimes.
Yeah. Well, Susan had been known even before this in the family as someone who sought attention and liked to be the center of attention and wanted to puff herself up all the time and be a little bit bigger than maybe she really was. Now, in her books later on, Susan would say that she began talking not because she wanted to brag or impress these women in that way with her stories, but she wanted them to think that she was really tough and really scary.
Sure.
Because she was actually very afraid.
Oh, okay.
Being in here with what she considered these hardened criminals.
Yeah.
Never mind the fact that she is involved in 2 murders.
Right.
These are the hardened criminals she's got to be afraid of. So, yes, Susan begins to tell her story, and boy, does she have a whopper. On November 3rd and over several days that followed, Susan mentioned that she was in jail on charges of first-degree murder, but that the murder she was actually jailed for wasn't really her fault, and she didn't actually do any of the actual murdering in this
Right.
particular
She was just
murder.
there.
Yeah. The cops were so dumb, she explained, that they had her in jail for the wrong murder, and that she had, in fact, been involved in some real murders, some famous cases, the one in Benedict Canyon. Virginia asked Susan if she was talking about the Tate murders, and Susan replied, "Well, you know who did it, don't you? You're looking at her." Susan went on to describe the crimes in great gory detail, adding details that while Sharon Tate begged for her life, she laughed and tasted her blood.
Oh.
Susan described the blood as being warm, sticky, and nice. She explained more about family life and Helter Skelter and, of course, Charles Manson, who she believed was Jesus Christ. Susan said the family would go on killing and that Charlie had made a list of pigs that he wanted to kill, and at the top of the list was Frank Sinatra, and that would just be the start. She talked about the bottomless pit and the magical city and how Charlie would save the world. She promised that these murders were only the beginning. So, how do you suppose Virginia and Ronnie reacted to this information?
I bet you they were a little bit taken aback, saying this girl's a bit crazy. Maybe I need a new cellmate.
Yeah. Well, they're probably sitting there like, man, we were talking about like our shitty pimps and funny stories about Johns and the stuff they'd ask us to do, and she's like killing mothers and babies and drinking their blood.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were a little freaked out, to say the least.
Yeah.
Virginia and Ronnie didn't have the reaction that Susan expected. The women were horrified to find that crazy Sadie really was crazy.
Yeah.
And a cold-blooded killer to boot.
Yeah, different kind of crazy than she was displaying. No, like real kind of killer crazy.
Yeah. Now, still, the informal prison code is that prisoners do not snitch on each other.
Right.
So they had to think about it. But eventually, when Ronnie was moved to a different prison, leaving Virginia alone with crazy Sadie,
Mm-hmm.
Virginia felt that she had to do something. And eventually, she spoke to investigators from LA County.
Now, do you think she was trying to talk to the investigators to try to help her own case?
Well, see, that's the problem. What we have as we go through this is a series of unreliable narrators, because all the people we're talking about
Yeah.
are facing charges for something.
Right, exactly. See, yeah, there's a little gray.
Meanwhile, around the same time, police were questioning members of the Straight Satan's motorcycle club. The reason for this is because they had learned that the Straight Satans had hung around the family, and they thought that they might have some information on the Hinman murder.
Okay.
Most members of the Straight Satans didn't spend that much time with the family except to have a place to drink beer and have sex with some of the girls.
Sure.
But one member, Al Springer, stated that fellow Straight Satan Danny DiCarlo told him that Manson had cut the ear off some guy and that he'd shot a black guy with a .22 buntline revolver. He further stated that Manson had told him personally on either August 11th or August 12th that they had knocked off 5 piggies just the other night. Springer asked if they'd had a homicide where somebody had written in blood on a refrigerator. Now, this was true in the LaBianca case, but that detail had not been made public yet.
Ah.
So
okay.
police knew that this Springer guy
Yeah, there's some truth to that.
really had some information to share. Now, this was the first time that the Tate and LaBianca investigators would actually formally begin working together on cases. And they decided to talk to Straight Satan Danny DiCarlo next. Danny DiCarlo was willing to talk to police because, guess what? He had some charges pending against him.
Of course. That's how it works.
So he said, yeah, if I talk to you guys about Manson and the family, maybe we can get these charges to disappear.
Uh-huh.
And they were like, hey, we'll help you out. So Danny came in and talked about life at Spahn Ranch and said that Manson had never mentioned the Tate or LaBianca murders to him, but that he would make an appointment to meet with investigators again so they could get their conversation on tape. So he was going to come back on Monday, November 17th. On November 14th, Bobby Beausoleil's trial started for the Hinman murder. Evidence against him was strong because he was found driving Hinman's car.
Sure.
The murder weapon was found hidden in the wheel well of that car.
Mm-hmm.
And his bloody prints had been found in Hinman's house.
Those are all. Those are three damning pieces of evidence.
Sure, but still, they didn't have a witness who was willing to testify that they ever heard Beausoleil admit to the Hinman killings, or any witnesses who put him at the actual scene of the murder.
Yeah.
So prosecutors were still a little bit nervous.
Right.
On November 17th, Danny DiCarlo shows up as promised at the police station to give his recorded testimony. However, he shows up 8 hours late. The reason for this is that he'd been pulled over on his way to the morning meeting for making an illegal turn. The police noticed he had a bunch of tickets and said, "Oh, you're going to have to come into the station."
Okay.
So he was arrested, but eventually he got out, and he went down to record his statement as soon as he got out. Now, Danny DiCarlo started off by assuring detectives that they'd come to the right man. He knew the family better than anybody who wasn't a full-fledged member. And he'd practically been a full-fledged member because he lived at the Spahn Ranch for 5 months. He began talking about life on the ranch, but the detectives were more interested in the murders.
Yeah.
They pressed him, and DiCarlo finally admitted that he knew something about the murders. According to DiCarlo, Beausoleil himself had told him that he had killed Gary Hinman. But he wasn't the only one involved. He said that Sadie had been there, and the cops already knew that, but he added that Mary Brunner had been there, and to a lesser extent, Bruce Davis and Manson himself had also been involved. In fact, it was Manson who'd cut Hinman's ear, and Manson was the one who planned the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one who told Bobby to finally go ahead and kill Hinman. Oh, and he also told them to write something on the wall, something like, "Kill the piggies," to make it look like a Black Panther had done it.
Sure.
And the reason he wanted it to look like a Black Panther had done it is because Manson had shot a black guy, a Black Panther, allegedly, using the .22 buntline revolver in a drug deal that had gone bad.
It all comes together.
So Charlie was afraid the Panthers would be looking for him, so they wanted to blame this other crime on the Panthers,
Sure.
which would get the police looking for the Panthers.
Okay, yeah.
This also ends up being a bit of an alternative motive to the Helter Skelter theory,
Sure.
that it wasn't about starting a race war, it was just about getting police attention on the Black Panthers, so they'd be too worried and busy fending off the police
Sure,
to
right.
worry about finding little Charlie Manson
Yeah.
for shooting one of their own. Incidentally, the man he shot wasn't dead and also wasn't a Black Panther. Police asked him if he knew anything about the disappearance of ranch hand Shorty Shea. Shorty Shea had gone missing
Of course he did.
after the raids at Spahn Ranch sometime.
Funny how that worked.
Yeah. DiCarlo said, yeah, he sure did know something about it. He said that he was sure that Manson had done the Tate killings too, and he'd be happy to talk about all of it, but first he wanted some assurances from police that the charges currently against him would disappear if he talked. Detectives assured DiCarlo that if he helped in the investigation, they would back him, quote, 100%, so he wouldn't end up in jail. DiCarlo started talking specifically about the murder of Shorty Shea at this point. He said that Manson had killed him and chopped him up into pieces because he believed that Shorty was the one who reported the auto thefts that caused the police to raid Spahn Ranch back in August. And he was also afraid that Shorty would act as a witness against the family in the future.
Yes.
So Ronnie Howard went to the police with her story of what Susan Atkins had told her.
Yeah.
They gave her the runaround. They didn't take her in right away for to ask her these questions and everything. It was a whole process because they're like, yeah, it's a con.
Of course. Yeah.
How can we believe
I'm
this
sure they get
person?
it
And-
all the time.
Right. But they finally listened to her and finally interviewed her on the same day as they were interviewing Danny DiCarlo.
Oh,
Different
really?
investigators.
Yeah.
But as DiCarlo was giving his interview, detectives who had just finished interviewing Ronnie Howard interrupt DiCarlo's interview to break the news that they had made a big break in the Tate case. The detectives interviewing DiCarlo took an hour-long break where they were briefed on the story that Ronnie Howard had given to police about the story that Susan Atkins had given her.
Sure, yeah.
When the investigators returned to question DiCarlo, they focused their questions squarely on the Tate murders. DiCarlo said that he knew the family had done it because Clem had told him so. He also told them he knew the family had borrowed ranch hand Johnny Schwartz's yellow 1959 Ford for both nights of murder. After this, DiCarlo mentioned the $25,000 reward Roman Polanski had been offering, leading to the arrest of the killers. DiCarlo felt sure that he would be entitled to some of this money. Police still had more questions for DiCarlo. They asked him if he knew anything about Zero's suicide. Now, Zero was a family member that had been picked up in the ranch raids back in October. And there was some concern on Charlie's side, and he sent out messages with Sandy and Squeaky to this extent, that Zero seemed a little weak. He might fold under questioning.
Oh, okay.
So when DiCarlo heard about Zero's suicide, he said, "What are you guys talking about?" And the detective said, "Well, the story we're getting is that he was hanging out with some of the girls from the family, and he decided to play Russian roulette with a fully loaded revolver. And he shot himself in the head, and Bruce Davis was there, but he just picked up the revolver, after the fact to move it away so it wouldn't be a danger to anybody."
Right. And they took that story as fact.
Well, they took the story.
They took the story.
Actually
Okay.
believed it or not, who knows?
Yeah.
DiCarlo said, "No, that Russian roulette story is bullshit. This man was murdered. The family is very dangerous. Charlie gives me the creeps. And guess what? I ain't testifying against them in public. I'll make a statement in court,
Sure.
to the grand jury or whatever, but not in public.
Right.
And, but I will still testify against Bobby Beausoleil if you get those charges against me dropped. The previous charges."
Yeah.
So that's his big deal. And the police are agreeable to it.
All right.
On November 18th, the case against Manson and his family members is coming together. And the DA decides they got to put somebody on this case who's going to prosecute this case eventually. So they assign it to Aaron Schwartz and a young man named Vincent Bugliosi.
Ooh.
Bugliosi is 35 years old, and he is considered an up-and-comer at the DA's office, and he's eager to prove himself, especially on such a high-profile case.
Yeah, this is a big break for him, so he wants to do a great job.
Yes, this will make or break his career.
Great.
Now, this leads to another problem, because we talk about unreliable witnesses when we talk about these criminals that are involved.
Yep.
I also somewhat feel that Vincent Bugliosi is an unreliable witness because he's got his own motives for wanting things to go a certain way.
Of course, yeah.
And I don't think it's wrong to say that he rode the tidal wave of fame on this trial as well. And he essentially became like America's DA.
Right.
To the point that even at the OJ trial, he's writing books about OJ Simpson,
sure.
and people are asking his opinions of the OJ murders.
Well, he's a celebrity lawyer at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
He's a new generation's F. Lee Bailey.
Yes.
But at this point, none of that had happened yet. He was just making his bones. He began to take the case very personally and would do some investigating on his own. When investigators announced that they were going back to Spahn Ranch to look for further evidence, Bugliosi opted to join them. They were going to bring Danny DiCarlo along as well, but DiCarlo said he would go, but only if they put him in handcuffs. So if there were any family members still hanging out at Spahn Ranch, they would see that, well, it would appear anyway,
he's not a threat,
that Danny DiCarlo wasn't there of his own accord.
Right.
He was being forced to go there against his will.
Right.
And so that's what the handcuffs were. And there were, of course, family members still hanging out at Spahn Ranch. And he showed him around the ranch. He showed him where things might be hidden. They took a few things into evidence, whatever. Bugliosi returned to his office, and he was informed that a decision had been made to offer Susan Atkins a plea deal if she would testify against Manson and the others. Bugliosi said, "We can't offer her a plea deal because Ronnie Howard is ready to testify that Susan Atkins personally killed Gary Hinman and Sharon Tate and drank her blood.
Yeah, right.
Like, that's not the kind of person you offer a plea deal to."
Right, exactly, yeah.
But the DA's office, and especially the LAPD, wanted to end this case ASAP.
Yes.
They said, "Look, we are under incredible public pressure. This is a high-profile, celebrity-involved case, and people want to see this solved. So if this is the only way we're going to get these Manson family members in jail, so be it. The idea was never to offer Susan Atkins immunity. They were going to
reduce her
punishment because they had the death penalty in California.
Right.
So they said, it's probably going to end up being like, we're not going to offer the death penalty. We'll just offer life in prison.
Right.
And she'll testify against her family. The family. Now, on November 26th, Bousselet's trial ends in a hung jury. Prosecutors announce their plan to retry him, and when they do, the DA assigns Bugliosi to this case as well for the next trial.
Oh my God. Okay.
So now they're like, you figure all of this out.
Yeah, right.
You're involved with all these cases now. Around the same time, Virginia Graham is finally interviewed and tells investigators all the stories that Susan had told her.
Yeah.
Her stories match Ronnie Howard's,
Yeah.
which match Danny DeCarlo's. They
Right.
all kind of fit together with
Right.
different pieces
Yeah.
of a puzzle. So now, like I said, most family members had been released, but some had been held because there were a few things they could make stick, and some were in for suspicion of murder. Investigators interview all the remaining family women who were still in prison, but they don't really get anything out of them except for Leslie Van Houten, who seemed especially disturbed by the news about the suicide of Zero.
Mm-hmm.
Police tell her what they know about the Tate killings, saying that so far they know that Charles Manson had been present at both the Tate and LaBianca killings.
Right.
And Leslie corrects them, saying she'd heard that Charlie wasn't even there. It was Tex and 3 other ladies.
Ugh.
Police said they already knew about Sadie and Katie, but who was this third lady? Leslie said, I don't know, some chick named Linda. And she also said that, I don't know if it was her or somebody else, but somebody had mentioned that Tex, they thought his actual name was Tex Montgomery.
Okay.
Charles Montgomery.
Yeah.
So the police say, okay, we got to look for someone named Linda, and we got to look for this Charles Montgomery. And Leslie says, yeah, but Linda wasn't even involved in the actual killing. She was just the driver.
Mm-hmm.
And the second night, she wasn't even at the scene. And they're like, okay. And they're like, well, tell us more. Tell us more about these things that you know. And all of a sudden, she suddenly clams up.
Oh, no.
So she's not talking anymore. Now, police go and they interview Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, who
Sure.
had been hanging out or
Charlie.
letting the family hang out at his house. But he really wants to distance himself.
Of course. Well, at this point, yes.
So
That's
he
probably
down-
a good move.
He downplayed. I mean, it's not the best look for a band that's known for like good vibrations.
Yeah,
and, like,
exactly,
beachy,
yeah.
sunny vibes to be connected to mass murder and
Yep.
So he wants to distance himself, and he's like, yeah, I knew the family. They'd hang out sometimes, but it wasn't really tight. Like,
Right.
it's not like that. And they basically get the same from Terry Melcher. Terry Melcher's the music producer that they were trying to get a deal with at Capitol Records. And he says, I've heard them a couple times. I might have met him once or twice, like not admitting that he'd
Yeah,
gone
putting
to the
no
ranch.
substance
and,
at all to the relationship.
Someone who did cooperate was Greg Jacobson,
Okay.
who was the one who tried to get Terry Melcher interested in Manson in the first
Sure.
place. And he said, yeah, we actually did go out there. We tried to get him recorded. I was trying to get a movie made about him because I just found this whole thing very interesting.
Sure.
And police are saying, well, we've been having some trouble finding Linda. And he's like, I don't know any Lindas. And he said, yeah, and we're also trying to find Charles Tex Montgomery. And Jacobson's like, oh, I know a Charles who goes by the name of Tex, but his last name's Watson, not Montgomery. So like, oh, okay, let's look up Watson. They look up Watson. They find out he'd been arrested in April on drugs and he was a family member. So they
Gotcha.
do a little digging and they find out he lives in Texas. They call Texas
Okay.
County Sheriff and they say, oh, yeah, I actually know him because he's my nephew.
Okay.
And he's at home with his mom right now. So they're like, well, could you go arrest him for first-degree murder?
My nephew? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So he does,
Okay, good.
but Tex wasn't home. He was out on a date.
Okay.
So they come back from an afternoon drive, him and his date, and Tex's dad is there, and he's like, Charles, we got to go to the police station and see your uncle, because apparently you're wanted about some murder, in California. And of course, Tex is like, I don't know what anybody's talking about. This is crazy. And Dad's like, yeah, probably, but let's just go and get it squared away, and we'll be home
Sure.
for dinner and all that.
That's an optimistic dad.
Yeah, so the sheriff's like, look, hey, we know you didn't do this. We absolutely know, but let's just get this whole thing straightened out, and we got to keep up appearances, so I do have to arrest you.
Yes.
But, we'll make sure everything goes smoothly for you. They don't extradite him to California right away.
Yeah.
It becomes a whole thing. I'm not going to go into the whole process, but it becomes a whole thing, and he ends up taking a whole separate trial than the rest of the Manson family. So that's the last we're going to hear about Tex for a little bit. At the same time, Pat Katie Krenwinkel is found to be living with relatives in Alabama, and she is arrested at that time. They do find out that Linda's last name is Kasabian through one of the other family members, but they have no idea where she is because she has also fled and is no longer with the family. On December 1st, Police Chief Davis holds a press conference announcing that the Tate and LaBianca murders have been solved. He says that most of the suspects are under arrest, but that arrest warrants have been issued for the remaining suspects, including Linda Kasabian. When Linda hears this on the news, she turns herself in the next day to authorities in New Hampshire, her home state. Soon after this, on the advice of her mother, former family member 17-year-old Barbara Hoyt goes to the police station to say that she had heard Shorty's screams the night that he had been murdered, and that she had also heard Susan bragging about being involved in the Tate murders. Hoyt promises to cooperate with any investigations the police need her for in the future.
Okay.
This becomes important in a future episode. Okay, so prosecutors soon learn that Linda Kasabian is seeking her own plea deal as well, and they think that's great, but unfortunately, they're already obligated now to Susan Atkins.
Right, yes.
They'd much rather give the plea deal to Linda Kasabian, though, because from what they've learned and from Linda's statements that they're going to get later on, they're going to find she wasn't personally involved in the murders aside from driving there and not perhaps stopping it in a way that she could have. But she didn't stab anybody. She didn't shoot anybody.
Right.
So if they were going to give a deal to anybody...
So, you want to give a plea deal to at least a little bit less of a despicable person.
Right. Susan was offered this deal. She was guaranteed that the state would not seek the death penalty if she gave evidence against the others. Further, if she refused to testify at the trial after giving her statement, or even recanted the testimony that she had given, none of her statements could be used against her or her fellow suspects in the actual trial. On December 5th, Susan gave a statement in front of the grand jury, most of which you heard in a previous episode, because that's how I described the murders using her own statements. Now, around this time, family members began visiting Susan in jail, and they noted that her son, Zizo Z, was still in state custody, having been taken during the ranch raids. But they assured her they would do everything in their power to see that she got to see her son again soon.
Oh, okay.
Now, is that the girls being nice and saying, hey, we're going to take care of your family on the outside, or is that a veiled threat?
Veiled threat.
Now, on December 9th, Charles Manson is formally charged in the Tate and LaBianca murders. When he shows up at court, there's press everywhere. He finally has the fame that he seems to have been seeking this entire time.
Yeah.
And it's not all bad news for Charlie, because he thinks, well, they don't really have anything against me. Susan might be testifying, but that's no big deal.
They have nothing directly connecting him to being there and participating in the murder.
Right. And they'll all agree that he really kind of didn't.
Yeah.
And so he thinks this means I'm not guilty.
Right.
So they can't charge me, and I'm going to be famous, and I'll get out, and I'll still be famous.
Yeah.
In fact, he calls his old friend Phil Kaufman. This is an old prison friend of his with music industry connections.
Yeah.
This is the man that first expressed that Manson should pursue a music career. And he says, Phil, you've got to get those recordings we made back in the day and release it as an album, because my name is white hot right now, and people will be dying to get their hands on a Charles Manson album.
He
Now-
had a point. I mean, because
Well-
people still to this day listen to his music.
Yeah. And you would think he would be right because he appeared on the cover of Life magazine.
Yeah.
They used an old mugshot of his where he's making these big crazy eyes.
Yeah.
And it just said Life, and it had a picture of
Sure.
Charles Manson, and it talked about his love terror cult. And so he was a big deal at this time. So he says, Phil, you got to get this album out. They got to hear my music. They got to hear the truth in my music. They got to hear how great I am. This is my moment. And Phil honestly believed that Manson wasn't guilty.
Okay.
So he said, you know what? I'm going to help a buddy out.
Okay.
So he puts up his own money, and he has 2,000 copies of an album pressed. And the album uses the same picture that Life magazine used. But instead of saying Life in the corner, they wrote Lie, implying that the Life magazine story was all lies and that Charles Manson was being railroaded. Now, they expected that this album would sell very well on the underground. But guess what?
Didn't.
It did not. Turns out people were not eager to hear the song stylings of a not
alleged
convicted, but
murderer.
yes, alleged murderer. On March 10th, much as her own lawyer and the DA feared, Susan Atkins recanted her testimony. Now, she would later say that she did this because it was the less terrible option out of two. She felt that if she stood with Charlie and the family, then the DA would seek the death penalty.
Sure.
But if she continued to testify against Charles Manson, then Manson would have her killed and would also have her son killed.
Oh, no. Okay.
So she said, well, I got to do what I got to do. Now, again, it's all kind of unreliable testimony, but this did happen after a prison meeting that she had with Manson.
Sure.
They were allowed to meet to discuss the upcoming trial in theory and all this. So, where are we at? 60 minutes.
Okay.
That's where I'm going to end. Looks like I'm doing the trial on another episode.
All right.
This has turned out to be like, if we get away with less than 6 parts, we'll be lucky.
It's an epic.
It really is.
Well, there's just so much to it.
There is.
It's good. It's
I'm not going to spend too long on the trial, though. That's what Helter Skelter's all about.
Yeah.
You can go read Helter Skelter or watch either one of the movies they made about it.
There's plenty out there about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to spend too long on the trial. We already talked about the Helter Skelter motive. There's really not too much to cover. So I don't know if I'm going to do one more episode covering the trial and then kind of the aftermath and where the family are now, whatever happened to them. Or maybe we'll do the trial and then do one more episode
All right.
about that. You guys write in and let me know. Are you sick of hearing about Charles Manson and the Manson family? Or do you want a couple episodes worth more?
Let them know. Let them know.
Believe me, there's a lot of details I'm kind of skipping around. And
You can let them know on Facebook. You can let them know on Twitter. You can let them know on Instagram.
There you
What
go.
are the handles?
All right, on Instagram and Twitter, we are at SpookyAssShit. You can also email at no, let me try that one again. You can also email spookyassshit@gmail.com, and you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. You can also join our secret closed group, the Spookaroos, there. You can also check out the website, spookyas.com or Spooky Ass Shit. There you can listen to each and every episode, even the ones no longer available on your favorite podcast streaming service. You can also find merchandise. Yeah, we've got t-shirts and tote bags and that kind of thing, stickers. If you're a true blue spookaroo, you definitely want to get some of that shit.
Well, and support the podcast. Eric puts in a lot of time here. And, you know, even just leaving a review on any of those platforms would be really great. Add a comment saying, we like what you're doing. If you hate it, maybe just send an email saying, hey, with some constructive criticism. But let's keep it positive, people. This is great content. Eric's doing a great job. And that's all I got. That's my whole spiel.
You're so smooth with that stuff, Tom. That's why I like having you on. You got to come back more often now.
I'll try. My life's a little less crazy now.
Yeah. Yeah, well, listen, man. Obviously, I know maybe you can't come every other week like you used to back in the day.
Yep.
But maybe once every other month or so
We'll try to make
would
it
be
work.
a good schedule.
I think that's doable. That's
Yeah.
more manageable.
Yeah. So I'm glad you're back.
I'm glad to be back.
We have missed you, all of us, but especially me because I know you in real life.
That's true.
And you're actually sitting across the room from
We're
me
actually
right now.
friends, people.
Yeah. So join us next time, and until then,
Bring only your
don't be afraid.
perfection, for their love will surely be no clothing, fear, or hunger. You can see, you can see, you can see.
Tonight's episode featured the voice talent of
Brian Toney as Tex Watson.